charred business card lies crumpled in the ashes, its gold lettering barely visible against the soot. Dream bigger than your circumstances. The card gleams faintly in the morning light, much like the woman who once carried it, powerful to the world, yet invisible to herself. This is the story of how a single father firefighter's courage in the flames led to an empire worth billions, but not in the way you'd expect. When Mason Bell rushed into the inferno consuming Evelyn Adams' hillside estate, he thought he was just saving another life. He had no idea that the CEO trapped inside would speak words that would transform his struggling existence forever. What happened in those smoke-filled moments changed everything, not through money or connections, but through something far more valuable. Sometimes the most extraordinary fortunes aren't built in boardrooms or bank vaults. Sometimes they're born from the ashes of our deepest fears, forged in the moment when one person refuses to let another burn. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The smoke alarm's piercing wail cut through the pride-on silence of Evelyn Adams' hillside estate in Millbrook Heights. At 4:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that would change everything, the 34-year-old CEO of NextX Solutions maintained her characteristic composure even as flames licked at the edges of her home. Office windows. Evelyn had built her reputation on staying calm under pressure. As the founder of a revolutionary artificial intelligence company that had transformed how hospitals managed patient care, she had navigated hostile takeover attempts, congressional hearings, and boardroom battles with the same steady demeanor she displayed now. Her employees often joked that ice water ran through her veins instead of blood. But as she stood in her silk pajamas, watching the fire spread through the mansion's east wing where her private office was located, something cracked in her carefully constructed facade. Not panic. Evelyn Adams didn't panic, but a recognition that some things couldn't be controlled through sheer force of will and strategic planning. The automatic sprinkler system had malfunctioned, and the flames were spreading faster than her emergency training had prepared her for. She had already called 911, had already evacuated her live-in housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, through the main entrance, had already grabbed her laptop containing the presentation that would secure NextX's next round of funding. Everything was proceeding according to the emergency protocols she had memorized and practiced. Everything except for one critical detail. The custom-built safe in her office contained more than just financial documents and backup drives. Hidden behind layers of encryption and fireproof steel was something irreplaceable. The original handwritten notes from her late mentor, Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, whose research had formed the foundation of NextX's breakthrough algorithms. More importantly, tucked inside those notes was a faded photograph of Evelyn at age 12, standing beside Dr. Rodriguez at the National Science Fair, both of them grinning as they held a trophy for most innovative young researcher. It was one of only 3 photographs Evelyn possessed from her youth, and the only one that captured a moment of pure joy before everything went wrong. As the fire department sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer but not close enough, Evelyn made a decision that contradicted every logical instinct she possessed. She turned back toward the burning wing of the house. The hallway leading to her office was thick with smoke, but the flames hadn't yet reached the corridor. Evelyn pulled her silk robe over her nose and mouth, dropping to her hands and knees as she remembered from fire safety demonstrations. The carpet was already warm beneath her palms as she crawled toward her office door. The safe's digital lock still functioned, its LED display glowing green against the orange-tinted smoke. Evelyn's fingers moved automatically across the keypad. Her mother's birthday, the date she'd never been able to forget despite trying for 22 years. The heavy door swung open, revealing neat stacks of documents, external drives, and there, in the back corner, the manila folder containing Dr. Rodriguez's notes and the precious photograph. As her fingers closed around the folder, A tremendous crack echoed above her. The ceiling beam, weakened by the fire's heat, was beginning to sag. Evelyn clutched the folder to her chest and turned to crawl back toward the hallway. But the smoke had thickened, and disorientation was setting in. She had built $1 billion company by thinking 10 moves ahead, by anticipating every possible variable and planning for every contingency. But fire, she realized with crystalline clarity, didn't care about strategic planning or quarterly projections or congressional testimonies. Fire consumed everything in its path with beautiful, terrifying indifference. For the first time since childhood, Evelyn Adams felt truly helpless. Not the controlled vulnerability she occasionally displayed in interviews to seem more relatable. Not the calculated moments of uncertainty she revealed to potential investors to demonstrate her humility. This was raw, primitive fear, the kind that strips away years of carefully constructed armor and reveals the frightened person underneath. The temperature in the room was rising, and through the window, she could see the fire department's ladder truck positioning itself in her circular driveway. The efficient part of her mind noted that they had made excellent time, probably under 6 minutes from dispatch to arrival. The terrified part of her mind wondered if 6 minutes might be too long. She pressed herself against the office window, hoping to signal her location to the firefighters below. The glass was warm against her palm, and through the smoke-stained surface, she could see figures in heavy gear moving with practiced efficiency around their equipment. They looked purposeful and competent, everything she prided herself on being. In her own domain. But as another ceiling being groaned ominously above her, Evelyn understood with perfect clarity that competence and control were illusions. Sometimes you could do everything right and still find yourself trapped in a burning room, clutching a photograph from your childhood, waiting for someone else to save you. The irony wasn't lost on her. She who had built her entire identity around saving others, whose AI systems had streamlined emergency room operations and reduced patient mortality rates by 18%, now needed rescuing herself. The woman who gave TED Talks about taking control of your destiny was about to discover how it felt to place her life entirely in someone else's hands. Through the smoke and growing heat, she heard voices calling from below, professional and reassuring. Help was coming. She just had to hold on long enough to receive it, something that required a different kind of strength than she was accustomed to wielding. Evelyn Adams had spent her adult life proving that she didn't need anyone, that self-reliance was the highest virtue, that dependence was weakness. As the flames crept closer and the ceiling groaned louder, she was about to learn that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need help. Evelyn Adams had not reached the pinnacle of Silicon Valley by accepting limitations. At 34, she commanded a corner office on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower in downtown Portland, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view that stretched from Mount Hood to the Pacific Ocean on clear days. Her company, NextX Solutions, had revolutionized healthcare AI with systems that could predict patient crises hours before traditional monitoring methods detected problems. The business magazines called her a visionary. Forbes had featured her on their 30 Under 30 list 7 years ago, and she'd since graduated to their most powerful women rankings. The Wall Street Journal had dubbed her algorithms the future of preventive medicine. What none of them knew was how desperately she needed the very prediction system she'd created, some way to foresee and prevent the disasters that seemed to find her despite her best efforts. Her Millbrook Heights estate, perched on 3 acres of carefully manicured hillside, reflected the same precision that defined her professional life. Every landscape detail had been planned by award-winning architects. The house itself was a masterpiece of modern design, with clean lines and smart home technology that anticipated her needs before she voiced them. The wine cellar was climate-controlled to the precise degree. The home gym featured equipment used by Olympic athletes. The kitchen boasted appliances that most restaurants couldn't afford. Yet, for all its perfection, The house felt like a beautiful museum where she happened to sleep. Evelyn often worked until midnight in her home office, then woke at 5 a.m. to review global markets before her morning run. She maintained this schedule even on weekends. Even during the rare vacations she took alone to destinations chosen more for their Wi-Fi reliability than their scenic beauty. The morning of the fire had begun. Like any other, she'd reviewed overnight reports from NextX international teams, responded to 14 emails from venture capital firms interested in their Series C funding round, and prepared talking points for a congressional subcommittee hearing about ethics in healthcare. Her calendar for the day included back-to-back meetings with potential pharmaceutical partners, a board presentation on Q3 projections, and a dinner with the mayor's Technology Advisory Council. Now sitting in the back of an ambulance while paramedics checked her for smoke inhalation, Evelyn watched her perfect house burn and felt an unexpected sense of liberation mixed with her shock. The EMT, a kind-faced woman named Harper, was asking routine questions about her medical history, but Evelyn found herself strangely detached from the conversation. Any chronic conditions, medications, allergies? Harper's voice seemed to come from very far away. No, Evelyn replied automatically, then paused. Actually, yes. I'm allergic to depending on other people. Harper looked up from her chart, clearly uncertain whether this was shock talking or an attempt at humor. That's not a medical allergy, ma'am. Evelyn almost smiled. Maybe it should be. The physical examination revealed minor smoke inhalation and a few small burns on her hands from handling the hot safe, nothing requiring hospitalization. But as Harper cleaned and bandaged the burns, Evelyn found herself studying the efficient movements of the woman's hands, the genuine care in her expression, the way she explained each step of the treatment process, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You're very good at this, Evelyn observed. Thank you, been doing it for 8 years. Harper secured the last bandage. You're lucky that firefighter got to you when he did. Few more minutes and we might be having a very different conversation. Which firefighter? Evelyn asked, realizing she hadn't properly thanked her rescuer in the chaos of the evacuation. Harper gestured toward the fire truck, where several figures in heavy gear were still working to contain the blaze. Mason Bell, guy with the 2 kids. Always asking questions about the equipment. He's the one who carried you out. Evelyn followed Harper's gaze but couldn't distinguish individual firefighters through their protective equipment. She made a mental note to find out how to contact him properly to send an appropriate thank you gift. Perhaps something for his children. Since Harper had mentioned them, the thought of children sparked an unusual emotion in Evelyn's chest, something like longing mixed with unfamiliarity. She had built her life around the assumption that personal relationships were liabilities, that emotional attachments created vulnerabilities that competitors could exploit. Her romantic relationships had been strategic partnerships at best, arrangements with men who understood that her career came first, second, and third. But watching the firefighters work together with such seamless coordination, seeing Harper's genuine concern for her well-being, Evelyn felt the first crack in her philosophical armor. Maybe there were forms of strength that came from connection rather than isolation. Her phone, miraculously undamaged in her robe pocket, had been buzzing continuously with calls from her assistant, board members, and media outlets who had somehow already gotten wind of the fire. The efficient part of her brain was calculating the PR response needed, the board statement that would reassure investors, the timeline for finding temporary office space for her home-based projects. But another part of her, a part that had been silent for so long she'd almost forgotten it existed, was wondering about the man who had run into a burning building to save her. What kind of person did that for a living? What kind of life led someone to risk their safety for strangers? The firefighter who helped me, Evelyn said to Harper as the EME prepared to leave. "Does he have a family?" "Mason? Oh yeah, sweet family. 2 kids, I think. Lost his wife a few years back, cancer. He's been raising them on his own while working double shifts sometimes." Harper's expression softened. "Really good guy. The kind who'd give you his last dollar if you needed it." The information hit Evelyn with unexpected force. Here was a man dealing with loss she couldn't imagine, raising children alone while literally running into burning buildings to save people like her people, whose biggest daily stress was weather. Their stock options would vest at the optimal tax moment. For the first time in her adult life, Evelyn Adams felt small. Not in the diminishing way that her childhood had made her feel small, but in the humbling way that came from encountering someone whose courage made her own achievements seem somewhat hollow by comparison. As the ambulance pulled away from her burning mansion, Evelyn clutched the manila folder containing Dr. Rodriguez's notes and that precious childhood photograph. The physical items had been saved, but something else had been lost in the fire, her certainty that success meant never needing anyone. That strength meant standing alone. She had spent 20 years building walls around her heart, using professional achievement as both shield and fortress. But walls that kept pain out also kept connection out. And as she watched her perfect, empty house burn in the rearview mirror, Evelyn began to wonder what she had really been protecting herself from, and whether the cost of that protection had been worth it. Evelyn Adams had been 12 years old when she learned that the people you love most can disappear without warning, leaving behind only questions and the terrible weight of things left unsaid. Before that October morning in 2001, her life had been remarkably stable. Her parents, both research scientists at Oregon Health and Science University, had built their careers around the methodical pursuit of answers. Dr. Catherine Adams specialized in pediatric oncology, while Dr. James Adams focused on genetic therapy. Research. Their Beaverton home was filled with medical journals, heated discussions about breakthrough treatments, and the quiet satisfaction of 2 people whose work actually saved lives. Evelyn had inherited their analytical minds and their passion for solving complex problems. While other kids played video games, she conducted experiments in the basement lab her parents had set up for her, complete with a microscope, basic chemistry equipment, and notebooks where she documented everything from the pH levels of household liquids to the growth patterns of different plant species under varying light conditions. Her parents encouraged this curiosity, taking her to science fairs, introducing her to colleagues who would patiently answer her rapid-fire questions about their research, and treating her more like a junior colleague than a typical adolescent. It was Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, her mother's research partner and closest friend, who had suggested Evelyn enter the National Science Fair with a project examining how different environmental factors affected cellular regeneration rates. The months leading up to the competition had been the happiest of Evelyn's life. She spent evenings in the lab with her parents and Dr. Rodriguez, refining her methodology, analyzing data, and learning to present complex information in accessible ways. Her parents beamed with pride as she practiced her presentation, and Dr. Rodriguez often told her that she had the mind of a future Nobel laureate. The science fair itself had been a triumph. Evelyn's project won first place in her age division, and the photograph now tucked in the manila folder captured the moment she and Dr. Rodriguez posed with the trophy, both grinning with the pure joy of scientific discovery shared and recognized. But success, Evelyn would learn, didn't protect you from tragedy. 3 weeks after the science fair, her parents flew to Atlanta for a medical conference where they were scheduled to present their joint research on gene therapy applications for rare childhood cancers. It was a routine trip. They attended such conferences twice a year, always returning full of new ideas and connections that energized their work for months afterward. Evelyn stayed with Dr. Rodriguez during these trips, something she actually enjoyed since Sarah had a gift for explaining complex concepts in ways that sparked new questions and research directions. They had planned to spend the weekend working on an advanced project involving bacterial cultures, something that would be challenging even for high school students. The call came at 6:23 a.m. on Saturday morning. Evelyn remembered the exact time, because she had been awake early, excited to start the day's experiments, when she heard Dr. Rodriguez answer the phone in the kitchen. She had been setting up the microscope when Sarah's voice changed, becoming sharp and strained in a way Evelyn had never heard before. "Yes, I understand that. Both of them." "No, there are no other immediate family members." "Yes, I'll tell her." Evelyn found Dr. Rodriguez sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, her hands shaking as she hung up the phone. The explanation came in fragments, delivered with the careful precision of someone trying to maintain scientific objectivity while her world collapsed. Severe weather. Low visibility. The small commuter plane carrying conference attendees had encountered unexpected turbulence during approach. No survivors. The investigation would take weeks, but preliminary reports suggested mechanical failure combined with adverse conditions. At 12 years old, Evelyn's analytical mind immediately began searching for the variables that could have prevented this. Outcome: different flight time, different airline, different weather patterns. If they had driven instead of flown. If they had skipped this particular conference. If she had been sick and required them to stay home. But for the first time in her life, the scientific method failed her. There was no hypothesis to test, no control group to examine, no way to recreate the conditions and achieve a different result. Her parents were gone, and all her intelligence, all her careful observation and logical reasoning, couldn't bring them back or explain why such a random, senseless event had targeted the two people whose work actually made the world better. Dr. Rodriguez became her guardian, a role she accepted, with the same methodical dedication she brought to her research. But Sarah was grieving too, having lost her closest friends and professional partners, and the house felt heavy with shared sorrow that neither of them knew how to process. Evelyn threw herself into academics with desperate intensity, as if perfect grades and advanced coursework could somehow honor her parents' memory or fill the silence that had replaced their dinner table discussions about medical breakthroughs and research possibilities. She completed high school in 3 years, graduated from Stanford at 19 with degrees in computer science and biochemistry, and earned her PhD in artificial intelligence applications by 23. Each achievement felt both like a tribute to her parents' values and a stark reminder of their absence. They would have been so proud, she thought, during every graduation ceremony, every research presentation, every professional milestone. They would have asked insightful questions, offered thoughtful feedback, and helped her see new applications for her work, but they weren't there, and Evelyn learned to carry her successes alone, to celebrate in empty apartments, to make major life decisions without the counsel of people who truly understood her motivations and fears. She had dated occasionally during graduate school, but every relationship eventually foundered on the same reef: Evelyn's fundamental belief that emotional attachment created vulnerability, that caring deeply about someone meant risking the devastating loss she had experienced at 12. Better to keep people at a safe distance, to maintain professional relationships that didn't require the kind of trust that could be shattered by random tragedy. Even her friendship with Dr. Rodriguez had become strained over the years, not through conflict, but through Evelyn's gradual withdrawal from any connection that felt too much like family. Sarah had tried to maintain the relationship, inviting Evelyn to holiday dinners, sending birthday cards, occasionally calling just to check in. But Evelyn's responses grew increasingly polite and distant until the calls stopped coming. By the time she founded Next Tech Solutions, Evelyn had perfected the art of professional intimacy, knowing exactly how much personal information to share, to seem relatable without becoming vulnerable, how to inspire loyalty in employees without developing genuine friendships. How to maintain board relationships that were cordial, but never crossed into the territory where someone's absence would leave her bereft. Her AI system specialized in prediction and prevention, in identifying problems before they became crises. It was, she realized now, sitting in the ambulance with Dr. Rodriguez's research notes clutched against her chest, the ultimate expression of a 12-year-old's desperate wish to see disaster coming in time to stop it. But you couldn't algorithm your way out of human connection. You couldn't create predictive models for love or friendship or the random kindnesses that made life meaningful. And you certainly couldn't prevent loss by refusing to let anyone get close enough to lose the photograph of her 12-year-old self. Grinning beside Dr. Rodriguez at the science fair showed a girl who believed the world made sense, who trusted that good people doing important work would be protected by the universe's fundamental fairness. The woman she had become knew better, knew that tragedy struck randomly and without regard for merit or preparation or the desperate wishes of those left behind. As the ambulance carried her away from her burning mansion toward an uncertain future, Evelyn wondered whether that 12-year-old girl had been naive or wise, and whether there was a way to honor her parents' memory that didn't require living in perpetual isolation from the very human connections they would have wanted for her. Mason Bell had learned to measure his life in small moments of grace rather than grand achievements. At 36, he could tell you exactly how many bedtime stories constituted a good day, precisely how much laughter was required to balance out one skinned knee, and the exact tone of voice that could transform tears into giggles without diminishing the validity of whatever had caused the tears in the first place. These skills hadn't appeared in any manual when he'd first become a single father 4 years ago. They had been earned through trial and error, through nights when he'd questioned every decision, through mornings when he'd wondered if love alone was sufficient qualification for raising 2 children whose needs sometimes exceeded his understanding. Gresham Fire Department Station 19 sat in a working class neighborhood where houses were built for function rather than display, where front yards contained swing sets instead of sculpture gardens, where neighbors knew each other's names and borrowed tools without formal arrangements. Mason had chosen to live 6 blocks from the station, in a modest 3-bedroom house that had been built in 1967 and showed every year of its age with character rather than shame. His mortgage payment was manageable on a firefighter's salary. Unlike the houses and developments where his colleagues with dual incomes or family money had settled. But the house had something more valuable than granite countertops or vaulted ceilings. It had a backyard large enough for a vegetable garden, a front porch where his kids could ride bikes safely, and neighbors who understood that sometimes single parents needed backup without being asked. Mason's day had begun at 5:30 a.m. with coffee brewed in a machine that Anna, his 8-year-old daughter, had programmed the night before as part of her ongoing campaign to be more helpful than Tommy. His son Tommy, 6 years old and fiercely independent, had already dressed himself in clothes that didn't quite match but reflected his personal aesthetic of comfortable and dinosaur-themed whenever possible. The morning routine moved with practiced efficiency. Breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast. Anna liked hers cut diagonally. Tommy preferred rectangles. Review of lunch preferences. Anna's changed daily. Tommy had eaten the same turkey and cheese sandwich for 3 months, and the careful negotiation of which stuffed animal could accompany Tommy to kindergarten without causing social complications. "Dad, can Mr. Dinosaur come to school today?" Tommy asked, clutching a well-loved brontosaurus that had been his constant companion since his mother's death. "You know the rule, buddy. Mr. Dinosaur gets lonely without his friend Mr. Triceratops. So they both have to stay home together." This logic satisfied Tommy while gently discouraging him from bringing comfort items that might make him a target for teasing. Mason had learned that parenting often required creative interpretations of truth that protected his children's emotional needs while preparing them for a world that wouldn't always be as understanding as their living room. Anna, more perceptive and 3 years older, understood the real reason but appreciated that her father found ways to help. Tommy maintained dignity while setting appropriate boundaries. She often served as an unofficial translator between Tommy's 6-year-old emotional needs and the practical demands of elementary school social dynamics. "I'll make sure he has a good day at after-school care," she told Mason while packing her backpack with the methodical precision she'd inherited from her mother. Mrs. Patterson lets him organize the book corner when he gets overwhelmed. The fact that his 8-year-old daughter was already learning to manage her younger brother's anxiety was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Anna had grown up faster than Mason would have preferred, but she wore her additional maturity with grace rather than resentment, often displaying emotional intelligence that surprised adults who weren't accustomed to children who spoke with such clarity about feelings and relationships. Mason drove them to Sunset Elementary, where Anna walked Tommy to his kindergarten classroom before heading to her own 3rd-grade class. They had developed this routine independently, one of many small ways Anna had stepped into a supportive role without being asked to shoulder inappropriate responsibility. "Pickup is at 6 tonight," Mason reminded them both. "I'm working a double shift, but if we get any interesting calls, I'll tell you about them at dinner." His children's fascination with firefighting equipment and emergency procedures had become an unexpected bridge between Mason's work life and home life. They knew the difference between structure fires and wildland fires, could identify different types of emergency vehicles by their sirens, and had absorbed enough safety information to make Mason confident they would respond appropriately to various household emergencies. At the station, Mason's colleagues had grown accustomed to his schedule, which revolved entirely around school pickups, parent-teacher conferences, doctor appointments, and the countless small emergencies that defined life with children. Captain Rodriguez, no relation to the Dr. Rodriguez from Evelyn's past, had children of his own and understood that single parents needed flexibility in exchange for their absolute reliability during scheduled shifts. "Belle, you're on truck duty today," the captain announced during morning briefings. "We've got a new probie riding with you, so make sure he understands how we operate in residential areas." The probie was Jake Morrison, 22 years old, and fresh from Fire Academy, eager to prove himself and slightly intimidated by veterans like Mason, who moved through emergency situations with calm efficiency. Mason remembered being that young and uncertain, back when he'd thought firefighting would be a temporary job while he figured out his real career path. That had been before he'd met Lisa, before marriage had given him a reason to appreciate stable employment with good benefits, before her cancer diagnosis had taught him that some battles couldn't be won through courage or determination alone, before single parenthood had shown him that heroism was less about running into burning buildings and more about showing up consistently for the people who depended on you. "The thing about house fires," Mason told Jake as they checked equipment, "is that they're never just about the house. Someone's home is burning. Their pictures, their grandmother's dishes, their kids' artwork from kindergarten. We save what we can, but sometimes the most important part of the job is helping people understand that they haven't lost everything." Jake nodded seriously, clearly trying to memorize this wisdom alongside the technical procedures he'd learned in training. Mason remembered being overwhelmed by the emotional complexity of emergency work, the way every call involved people experiencing the worst day of their lives. Lisa had been the one who'd helped him process those emotions, who'd listened to him, described difficult calls, and helped him find meaning in work that often felt like fighting inevitable entropy. After her death, he'd had to learn to carry that emotional weight alone, while also being strong enough for Anna and Tommy, who needed their father to be a source of stability rather than someone who brought the world's sadness home with him. Call about the house fire in Millbrook Heights came in at 4:52 a.m., just as Mason was reviewing inventory reports and Jake was learning to calculate water pressure for different hose configurations. "Structure fire, possible occupant trapped, multiple units responding." "Millbrook Heights?" Jake asked as they suited up. That's where all the rich people live, right? Rich people's houses burn just as fast as everyone else's, Mason replied, checking his oxygen tank and radio. And rich people get just as scared when they're trapped in smoke. As Engine 19 rolled through the pre-dawn darkness toward the hills where Portland's wealthy had built their estates, Mason found himself thinking about Anna and Tommy, probably still sleeping in their shared bedroom. They had insisted on bunk beds, claiming it was more fun than separate rooms. Though Mason suspected they found comfort in each other's presence during the night, he had promised to be home by 6 p.m., had promised to hear about Anna's science project and Tommy's art class. Creation. Single parenthood meant that every emergency call carried a dual awareness, the immediate crisis requiring his professional attention, and the quieter but equally important crisis of two children who needed their father to come home safely. Most calls ended routinely, kitchen fires extinguished quickly, minor accidents resolved without serious injury, false alarms that provided training opportunities without real danger. But as they approached the burning mansion in Millbrook Heights, Mason could see that this call would be different. The house was a work of architectural art, probably worth more than Mason would earn in a lifetime, and it was being consumed by flames with the same indifferent hunger that destroyed trailer homes and apartment buildings. Smoke was pouring from the upper floors, and Captain Rodriguez was already coordinating with other units to establish water supply and plan their approach. Occupant possibly trapped on the second floor, east side, came the report over the radio. Unclear if they evacuated or attempted to return inside. Mason felt the familiar surge of adrenaline mixed with methodical planning that defined emergency work. Someone was inside that burning building, someone with their own family, their own people who needed them to come home safely. The dollar value of the house was irrelevant. The value of the life inside was absolute. As he prepared to enter the burning mansion to search for survivors, Mason thought briefly of Anna and Tommy, sleeping peacefully in their bunk beds, trusting that their father would keep his promise to come home. That trust gave him strength, but it also reminded him that heroism was only meaningful if you lived to continue being the person others depended on. He had no way of knowing that the woman trapped inside would challenge everything he believed about success, family, and the different ways people built meaning from the aftermath of loss. The interior of the burning mansion felt like entering a living furnace. Mason moved through the smoke-filled hallway with practiced efficiency, his breathing apparatus providing clean air while his thermal imaging camera cut through the gray haze to reveal the building's layout. Behind him, Jake Morrison followed closely, his nervousness evident even through the bulky protective gear, but his movements steady and professional. Victim likely on the second floor, East Wing. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through Mason's radio. Be advised, structural integrity compromised in that section. Watch for ceiling collapse. Mason acknowledged the warning and continued toward the staircase, his experienced eye automatically cataloging the fire's progression, the likely path of spread, the escape routes that remained viable. The house's open floor plan, probably stunning under normal circumstances, now created dangerous drafts that were feeding the flames and filling the space with toxic smoke. At the base of the stairs, Mason paused to test the structural stability. The wooden steps felt solid beneath his weight, but he could hear ominous creaking from the floor above. Someone was up there. He could hear occasional sounds that might be movement, might be debris falling, might be the house settling as the fire weakened its supports. Going up, he radioed to Captain Rodriguez. Morrison with me. Ada to search completion approximately 8 minutes. The second floor was a maze of smoke and heat. Mason's thermal camera showed hot spots throughout the walls, indicating the fire had spread through the structure in ways that weren't visible from outside. The East Wing, where the victim was reportedly trapped, showed the highest temperatures, but also the clearest indication of human presence. Fire department, Mason called out as loudly as his breathing apparatus allowed. "If you can hear me, make noise." The response came immediately, a steady tapping sound coming from what appeared to be an office or study. Mason followed the sound through the corridor, noting that the door was closed, which had probably protected the occupant from the worst of the smoke while simultaneously trapping them as the fire consumed the surrounding areas. "Stand back from the door," Mason called, then used his halogen bar to force the lock. The door opened to reveal a scene that was both better and worse than he'd expected. Better because the woman inside was conscious, alert, and had positioned herself by the window where the air was clearer. Worse because the ceiling in this room was showing clear signs of imminent collapse, and the floor felt dangerously unstable beneath Mason's feet. The woman was small-framed but held herself with unmistakable authority, even while wearing silk pajamas and clutching what appeared to be a manila folder against her chest. Her dark hair was disheveled, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes were sharp and focused as she quickly assessed Mason and Jake's arrival. "Evelyn Adams," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I tried to save some documents from my safe. I realized that was probably not the smartest decision I've made this week." Mason appreciated that she was calm and coherent. Panicked victims were harder to evacuate safely, but he was more concerned with the structural warnings his trained eye was detecting. The ceiling beam directly above them was sagging visibly, and he could feel the floor shifting slightly with their combined weight. "We need to move now," Mason said, approaching her carefully. "Can you walk?" "I think so. Minor burns on my hands, some smoke inhalation, but nothing that should prevent movement." She paused, seeming to really see him for the first time. "You came back for me." The phrase struck Mason oddly. Of course he'd come back for her. That was his job, his training, his fundamental purpose. But something in her tone suggested that being rescued was not an experience she was accustomed to, that depending on others felt foreign and significant. "Ma'am, we need to move immediately," Jake interjected, his nervousness evident but controlled. "This whole section is about to go." Mason positioned himself to support Evelyn's weight as they moved toward the door. She was surprisingly steady on her feet, but he could see her gripping the manila folder with white knuckles, as if releasing it would mean losing something irreplaceable. "What's in the folder?" Mason asked as they began moving through the smoke-filled corridor. "Memories," Evelyn replied simply. "The only ones I have left of certain people." They made it halfway to the staircase before the ceiling beam gave way behind them with a crash that shook the entire structure. Jake stumbled but maintained his footing, while Mason instinctively shielded Evelyn from the shower of debris and sparks that followed the collapse. "Are you hurt?" Mason asked, checking her for new injuries. Evelyn shook her head, but Mason noticed that she was looking back toward her office with an expression of profound loss. The folder in her arms contained documents, but her eyes were focused on something else, probably a lifetime of possessions and achievements that were being consumed by flames. "I'm sorry," Mason said as they continued toward the stairs. "We'll try to save what we can, but the structure is too compromised to go back." "I know," Evelyn replied. "You saved what mattered most." The comment surprised him. Most people focused on material losses, furniture, electronics, jewelry, art collections. This woman seemed to understand instinctively that preservation of life took precedence over preservation of property, a perspective that wasn't always easy for victims to maintain when watching their homes burn. The trip down the staircase required careful coordination. The steps were still structurally sound, but smoke had thickened throughout the lower level, reducing visibility to almost zero even with thermal imaging. Mason kept one hand on Evelyn's shoulder, guiding her movement while Jake maintained their connection to the exit route. "How do you do this?" Evelyn asked as they descended. "How do you run toward danger when everyone else is running away?" Training, Mason replied automatically, then reconsidered. And knowing that someone's family is waiting for them to come home safe. Do you have a family waiting for you? The question was more personal than Mason typically shared with victims. During evacuations, but something about this woman's directness and the intimacy created by shared danger made honesty feel appropriate. 2 kids, Mason said. Anna's 8, Tommy's 6. They're probably still asleep right now, dreaming about whatever 8 and 6-year-olds dream about. And their mother? Died 4 years ago, cancer. Evelyn was quiet for several steps, then said, "I'm sorry." "That must be incredibly difficult." "It is," Mason replied. "But they're amazing kids. They've taught me more about courage than any fire ever has." They reached the first floor, where the air was clearer and the exit was visible through the smoke. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the radio, asking for status updates, and Mason could see the flashing lights of additional emergency vehicles through the windows. "Almost there," Mason told Evelyn. "Just a few more steps." But as they approached the main entrance, Evelyn suddenly stopped walking. Mason turned to see her staring back at the burning staircase they'd just descended, her face illuminated by the orange glow of the flames. "I built this house to be perfect," she said quietly. "Every detail planned, every system optimized, every possible problem anticipated and prevented. I thought if I could control enough variables, I could keep disaster from finding me again." Mason understood instinctively that she wasn't just talking about the fire. "Sometimes disaster finds us anyway," he said gently. "The important thing is how we respond and who we let help us through it." Evelyn looked at him then with an expression he couldn't quite interpret: surprise, recognition, something that might have been the beginning of trust. "You didn't hesitate," she said. "When you heard someone was trapped, you just came, without knowing who I was or whether I was worth the risk." "Everyone's worth the risk," Mason replied simply. As they stepped out of the burning house into the pre-dawn air, where paramedics and fire personnel were waiting to provide medical attention and begin the complex process of containing the blaze. Mason realized that something significant had happened during those few minutes in the smoke-filled Fayette mansion. Not just a successful rescue, though it had been that, but a moment of connection between 2 people whose lives had been shaped by loss, who had developed different strategies for protecting themselves from future pain, and who had recognized in each other something worth preserving. Evelyn Adams, the CEO who had built walls around her heart and a perfect house around her life, had been rescued not just from fire but from the illusion that complete control was possible or even desirable. And Mason Bell, the single father who measured his days in small moments of grace, had been reminded that heroism sometimes meant not just saving lives, but helping people understand that they were worth saving. As the paramedics took over Evelyn's care and Mason began the process of helping his crew contain the fire, he found himself thinking about the woman in the silk pajamas who had risked her life to save a folder of memories, and wondering what kind of story could turn someone so successful into someone so alone. He had no way of knowing that before this day ended, Evelyn Adams would speak words that would change not just his financial future, but his entire understanding of what it meant to build a meaningful life. 3 days after the fire, Mason found himself standing in the lobby of the Meridian Tower, feeling distinctly out of place among the polished marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Portland's skyline. He wore his best civilian clothes, khakis, and a button-down shirt that Anna had helped him pick out, but he still felt like he was wearing a costume designed for someone else's life. "Mr. Bell?" The receptionist's voice was professionally warm. "Miss Adams is expecting you on the 42nd floor." The elevator ride felt endless, each floor marking his ascent into a world where decisions were measured in millions rather than the small victories that defined his daily existence. When the doors opened, he was greeted by a reception area that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that environments could communicate power and success without saying a word. Mason. Evelyn's voice carried genuine warmth as she approached from what he assumed was her office. She looked different in her professional setting, composed, authoritative. Every inch the CEO who had built $1 billion company from algorithms and determination. But when she smiled, he caught a glimpse of the woman who had clutched a manila folder in a smoke-filled room and asked him about his family. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, gesturing toward a conference room with windows that offered a view that probably cost more per square foot than Mason's entire house. "And I wanted to ask you something." The conference room contained a table that could have seated 20 people, but Evelyn had arranged 2 chairs at one corner, creating an intimate conversation space that somehow made the vast room feel less intimidating. On the table sat a leather portfolio and what appeared to be a business plan bound in expensive paper. "First, the thanks," Evelyn said, opening the portfolio to reveal a check that made Mason's eyes widen. "This is a donation to the Gresham Fire Department in your honor. New equipment, training programs, whatever Captain Rodriguez thinks would be most beneficial." Mason stared at the amount, more money than his department typically saw in discretionary funding over several years. "Ms. Adams, this is incredibly generous, but you don't need to." "I absolutely do need to," Evelyn interrupted gently. "You risked your life for someone you'd never met. That deserves recognition, and more importantly, it deserves support so you can continue helping other people." She closed the portfolio and leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting from professional gratitude to something more personal and uncertain. "But there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. It's going to sound unusual, and you should feel completely free to say no." Mason waited, curious about what could make a woman who commanded boardrooms full of venture capitalists look nervous. "I've been thinking about what you told me in the house," Evelyn continued. "About your children, about how they've taught you about courage. I've spent most of my adult life believing that success meant not needing anyone, that strength came from independence. But watching you work, seeing how you approach danger because you knew someone needed help, it made me realize there might be forms of strength I've never considered." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I lost my parents when I was 12. Since then, I've built my entire life around never being that vulnerable again. I've been very successful professionally, but I've also been very alone. And after the fire, after you rescued me, and I watched my perfect house burn down, I started wondering if I've been protecting myself from the wrong things." Mason found himself leaning forward, drawn by her honesty and the recognition that vulnerability required its own form of courage. "What I'm asking," Evelyn said, "is whether you'd be willing to let me spend some time around your family. Not as a business arrangement or a charity case, but as someone who needs to remember what it feels like to be part of something larger than quarterly projections and board meetings." The request was so unexpected that Mason needed a moment to process it. "You want to spend time with Anna and Tommy?" "I want to learn from them," Evelyn clarified. "And from you. I want to understand how you've built a life that's meaningful in ways that have nothing to do with stock options or revenue growth. I realize this is an unusual request, and I understand if you're not comfortable with it." Mason thought about Anna's endless questions about everything from why firefighters wore masks to how elevators worked, and Tommy's ability to find wonder in things that adults had learned to take for granted. He thought about the dinners around their small kitchen table, the bedtime stories that had become collaborative storytelling sessions, the way his children had learned to find joy even in the aftermath of loss. "They'd probably love it," Mason said slowly. "Anna especially. She's been fascinated by the rescue since I told them about it. And Tommy ... He smiled, thinking of his son's enthusiastic approach to new people. "Tommy will probably want to show you his entire dinosaur collection and explain why each one is the best dinosaur for different situations." Evelyn's smile was the first completely unguarded expression Mason had seen from her. "That sounds perfect." The arrangement they worked out was informal but consistent. Twice a week, Evelyn would join them for dinner, helping with homework, listening to Anna's elaborate plans for various science projects, and learning to appreciate Tommy's detailed explanations of dinosaur behavior and prehistoric ecosystems. The first few visits were awkward in the way that most cross-cultural exchanges began. Evelyn, accustomed to environments where every conversation had strategic implications, had to learn the rhythm of family discussions where topics ranged from serious, Anna's concerns about climate change, to silly, Tommy's theory that vegetables would taste better if they were shaped like dinosaurs without warning or apparent logic. But Anna and Tommy, with the adaptability that children possessed in abundance, quickly incorporated Evelyn into their routine. Anna appreciated having an adult who could answer her science questions with the depth and precision that her curiosity demanded. Tommy was delighted to have a new audience for his various collections and discoveries. "Look, Miss Evelyn," Tommy announced during her third visit, presenting a carefully arranged display of rocks he'd collected from the playground. "This one looks like a tiny mountain, and this one is probably from a volcano, and this one might have dinosaur fossils in it if we crack it open very carefully." Evelyn examined each rock with the same attention she might have given to market research, asking questions that demonstrated genuine interest rather than patronizing adult indulgence. "How do you think we could test whether this one really contains fossils?" she asked, holding up a particularly promising specimen. "We could take it to the museum," Anna interjected. "They have people there who know about rocks and fossils." "We went on a field trip, and the lady said they help people identify things they find." "That sounds like an excellent research methodology," Evelyn replied seriously. "Would you like to go to the museum this weekend? I'd be interested to learn what the experts think about Tommy's fossil hypothesis." The museum trip became the first of many weekend adventures that gradually expanded the boundaries of all their worlds. Evelyn discovered that children's questions often led to genuinely interesting explorations of topics she'd never considered. Anna and Tommy learned that adults could be curious and playful while still being knowledgeable and reliable. For Mason, watching Evelyn interact with his children provided insights into both her character and her needs that no amount of adult conversation could have revealed. He saw how she listened with complete attention when Anna explained her concerns about whether the planet would be healthy when she grew up, offering realistic information without dismissing the legitimacy of environmental anxiety. He watched her patience when Tommy needed multiple explanations of why certain dinosaurs had different diets, and how she seemed to genuinely enjoy the detailed discussions of herbivore versus carnivore feeding strategies that could occupy Tommy for entire car rides. But more significantly, Mason began to see how Evelyn changed in their presence. The professional armor she wore in her corporate environment gradually relaxed into something more authentic. She laughed more easily, asked questions that revealed curiosity rather than strategic information gathering, and displayed a playful side that had probably been dormant since her own childhood. "You're different with them," Mason observed one evening after Anna and Tommy had gone to bed and they were cleaning up the dinner dishes together. "Different how?" Evelyn asked, though her tone suggested she knew what he meant. "Lighter. More like the person you probably were before you decided you had to carry everything alone." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, drying a plate with more attention than the task required. "They make it feel safe to be curious again," she said finally. "In my professional life, questions can be seen as weaknesses and enthusiasm can be exploited by competitors. With Anna and Tommy, curiosity is valued and excitement is infectious." She paused, then added, "I'd forgotten what it felt like to look forward to simple things. Tuesday dinners, weekend adventures, hearing about their daily discoveries. It's like remembering a language I used to speak fluently, but hadn't practiced in years." As weeks passed, their relationship deepened from arrangement to authentic connection. Evelyn began bringing small gift science experiment kits for Anna, dinosaur books for Tommy, but she also brought something more valuable, her complete attention and genuine interest in their thoughts and experiences. Mason found himself looking forward to their dinners not just because his children enjoyed them, but because Evelyn's presence added richness to their routine conversations. She asked questions that helped Anna articulate her ideas more clearly, and she listened to Tommy's elaborate stories with the same respect she might have given to an important business presentation. But the real transformation happened gradually, in small moments that accumulated into something significant. When Anna struggled with a math concept, Evelyn didn't just provide the answer, she helped Anna understand the underlying logic in ways that built confidence rather than dependency. When Tommy had nightmares about dinosaurs, the inevitable result of too much paleontological enthusiasm, Evelyn suggested they research which dinosaurs were actually gentle plant eaters, turning fear into education. She gets it, Anna told Mason one night during their bedtime conversation. She knows that just because we're kids doesn't mean we can't understand complicated things. And she doesn't try to make everything seem easier than it is. Tommy's assessment was more direct. I think Miss Evelyn was lonely before she met us. Now she smiles more. Mason realized that his children had identified something he'd sensed, but hadn't articulated. Evelyn wasn't just learning about family life. She was healing from the isolation she'd imposed on herself after losing her parents. Anna and Tommy were providing her with the same thing she was giving them, the experience of being genuinely seen and valued for who they were rather than what they could provide. By the end of 2 months, Evelyn had become woven into their family routine so seamlessly that Mason couldn't imagine Tuesday and Friday evenings without her. She knew Anna's homework schedule, Tommy's bedtime preferences, and the complex logistics of managing school events, doctor appointments, and the unpredictable demands of Mason's firefighting schedule. More importantly, she had learned to receive care as well as give it. When Mason worked double shifts, Evelyn arranged her corporate schedule to provide backup childcare. When Anna got sick with flu, Evelyn appeared with homemade soup and the willingness to read endless chapters of whatever book Anna was currently obsessing over. You know, Mason said one evening as they sat on his front porch watching Anna and Tommy play in the yard, you've become part of our family without us ever officially discussing it. Evelyn smiled, an expression that had become more frequent and more genuine over the weeks. Is that okay with you? It's more than okay, Mason replied. It's exactly what we needed, even though we didn't know we needed it. Neither of them could have predicted that this foundation of trust and genuine affection would soon be tested by the kind of misunderstanding that reveals whether a relationship is strong enough to survive the collision between different worlds and different definitions of help. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by certified mail to Mason's modest house on Elm Street. Anna found it first, examining the official envelope with the curiosity she applied to everything that seemed important or unusual. Dad, this looks like the letters you get from the bank, she announced, bringing the envelope to Mason while he prepared breakfast. But it's from someplace called Pacific Educational Foundation. Mason accepted the letter with the mild concern that certified mail always prompted. He opened it while Anna poured orange juice and Tommy arranged his dinosaur figures around his cereal bowl in what he claimed was proper breakfast formation for herbivores. The letter's contents made Mason read through it twice before the words fully registered. Dear Mr. Bell, we are pleased to inform you that your children, Anna Bell and Tommy Bell, have been selected as recipients of the Pacific Educational Foundation's Emergency Assistance Scholarship Program. This program provides comprehensive educational support, including tutoring services, enrichment activities, and college preparatory resources for children of first responders who have demonstrated exceptional courage in the line of duty. Scholarship covers all educational expenses through high school graduation, including summer programs, specialized tutoring, and college application support. Additionally, the foundation will establish college savings accounts for both children. with initial deposits of $50,000 each, growing through annual contributions until they reach college age. This award is made in recognition of your heroic actions during the Millbrook Heights residential fire rescue on date, and our commitment to supporting the families of those who risk their lives in service to others. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss implementation details. Sincerely, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Executive Director, Pacific Educational Foundation. Mason set the letter down carefully, his mind racing through the implications. The scholarship was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars over time, more money than he could have saved for his children's education, even with decades of careful financial planning. It would transform Anna and Tommy's opportunities, opening doors to colleges and experiences that had seemed impossible on a firefighter's salary. But the timing felt too convenient, too perfectly aligned with recent events, too specifically tailored to his family situation. "What does it say, Daddy?" Anna asked, noticing his expression. "It's about school stuff," Mason replied automatically, still processing. "I need to make some phone calls to understand it better." That evening, after Anna and Tommy were in bed, Mason called the Pacific Educational Foundation. Dr. Martinez was professional and informative, explaining the scholarship's benefits in detail. But when Mason asked about the foundation's history and other recipients, her answers became more vague. "The foundation was established recently," she acknowledged. "We're focusing initially on a small number of exceptional cases to ensure our programs are properly developed before expanding." "How many other families are receiving this scholarship?" Mason asked. "Currently, you're our pilot family. We want to make sure we can provide the highest quality support before taking on additional recipients." The conversation confirmed Mason's suspicions. This wasn't a legitimate scholarship program. It was an elaborate way for Evelyn to provide financial support without directly offering charity. The thought that she had gone to such lengths to help his children while deceiving him about the source created a complicated mixture of gratitude and anger that kept him awake most of the night. Friday evening, Evelyn arrived for dinner with her usual contributions: flowers for the table, a science magazine for Anna, a new dinosaur fact book for Tommy. She moved through their routine with practiced ease, helping Anna with math homework while Tommy explained his latest theory about why different dinosaurs had evolved different types of teeth. Mason waited until after dinner, until the children were occupied with a nature documentary in the living room, before raising the subject. "We need to talk," he said quietly, showing her the scholarship letter. Evelyn's professional composure didn't change, but Mason caught the brief flash of something: guilt perhaps, or the recognition that her deception had been discovered. "It's a legitimate foundation," she said carefully. "The scholarship program provides real educational benefits." "Evelyn." Mason's voice was patient, but firm. "The foundation was established 3 weeks ago. I'm the only recipient. The timing coincides exactly with you learning about my concerns about saving for Anna and Tommy's college education." She looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "You're right. I funded the foundation and designed the scholarship specifically for your family. Why?" The question carried more hurt than anger. "Why couldn't you just talk to me directly?" "Because I knew you'd say no." Evelyn's response was immediate and honest. "You're proud, you're independent, and you've built a beautiful life for your children without anyone's help. I didn't want to insult that accomplishment by suggesting you needed charity. So instead you decided to lie to me." The word hung between them, sharper than Mason had intended, but accurate in ways that couldn't be softened. "I didn't think of it as lying," Evelyn replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "I thought of it as finding a way to help without making you feel diminished." Mason set the letter on the kitchen counter and leaned against it, trying to organize his thoughts. "Do you understand what this feels like from my perspective?" "I'm starting to," Evelyn said quietly. "For the past 2 months, you've been part of our family. You've sat at our table, helped with homework, listened to bedtime stories. You've seen how we live, what we value, how we've managed since Lisa died. Mason's voice remained calm, but Evelyn could hear the deep emotion beneath the surface. And apparently, during all of that time you were deciding that what we'd built wasn't enough. That's not. It is though, Mason interrupted gently. You looked at our life and decided we needed saving. You saw me working double shifts, and Anna worrying about college costs, and Tommy wearing hand-me-down clothes, and you concluded that love and effort weren't sufficient, that we needed your money to make our family legitimate. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. I never thought your family wasn't legitimate. I think your family is the most authentic, loving environment I've ever experienced. That's exactly why I wanted to help. Then why didn't you trust me enough to have an honest conversation about it? The question struck at the heart of Evelyn's decision-making process. She had approached Mason's family the same way she approached business challenges, identifying problems, and implementing solutions without fully consulting the people most affected by her choices. Because ... Evelyn paused, recognizing the truth even as she spoke it. Because I'm not good at asking for things or offering things directly. I'm good at creating systems and structures that produce desired outcomes without requiring emotional vulnerability. But that's not how families work, Mason said. Families work through conversation and compromise, and sometimes disagreement, and always honesty. You can't algorithm your way into genuine relationships. The insight hit Evelyn with the force of recognition. She had been trying to love Mason's family the way she ran her company, through strategic planning, resource allocation, and outcome optimization. But love, she was beginning to understand, required different skills entirely. I wanted to give Anna and Tommy opportunities, she said. I wanted to take away your financial stress. I wanted to help without making you feel like I was judging your ability to provide for them. And instead you made me feel like you don't trust me enough to include me in decisions that affect my children's future. Mason's assessment was accurate and devastating. Evelyn had been so focused on protecting his pride that she had undermined the foundation of respect that made their relationship possible. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it completely. You're absolutely right. I should have talked to you directly. It's not just about the money, Mason continued. It's about what the deception says about how you see me. Do you think I'm so fragile that I can't handle an honest conversation about my children's needs? Do you think I'm so proud that I'd refuse help that could benefit Anna and Tommy? Evelyn considered the question seriously. I think you're strong enough to handle anything. But I also think you've built your entire identity around providing for your children without help, and I was afraid that offering financial assistance would feel like criticism of your efforts. Maybe it would have, Mason acknowledged. Maybe we would have had a difficult conversation about pride and need, and what it means to accept help from people who care about you. But we would have had that conversation as equals, as adults, as people who trust each other enough to be honest about complicated feelings. The kitchen felt very quiet around them. In the living room, they could hear Anna asking Tommy questions about dinosaur migration patterns, their voices creating the background soundtrack of family life that had become so precious to Evelyn over the past 2 months. I don't know how to do this, Evelyn said finally. I don't know how to care about people without trying to fix their problems. I don't know how to offer help without controlling how it's received. I've spent so many years protecting myself from emotional complexity that I don't have the skills for navigating it successfully. Mason's expression softened slightly. None of us know how to do this perfectly. But we figure it out together, through mistakes and apologies and trying again. Are we going to be able to try again? Evelyn asked, her vulnerability evident in a way that her corporate environment never witnessed. Mason looked at her for a long moment, seeing the woman who had lost her parents at 12 and had been trying to prevent further loss ever since. who had built a billion-dollar company, but couldn't figure out how to simply ask a friend if he needed help. "I need some time to think about this," he said honestly. "And Anna and Tommy are going to ask questions about why you're not coming to dinner anymore. What will you tell them?" "The truth," Mason replied. "That adults sometimes make mistakes in how they try to help each other, and that we need to figure out how to do better." Evelyn nodded, understanding that she had damaged something precious, and that repair would require more than good intentions or financial resources. "For what it's worth," she said as she prepared to leave, "spending time with your family has been the most meaningful part of my life in 20 years. I hope I haven't destroyed that completely." "You haven't destroyed anything," Mason replied. "But you've shown me that we have different ideas about trust and honesty and how relationships work. I need to figure out if those differences can be bridged." After Evelyn left, Mason sat at his kitchen table reading the scholarship letter again, trying to separate his hurt feelings from his children's genuine needs. The money would transform Anna and Tommy's educational opportunities, would remove financial stress that kept him awake at night, would give his children chances he couldn't provide alone. But accepting it would mean accepting the premise that Evelyn's wealth made her a better parent to his children than his love and effort could. It would mean acknowledging that some problems required solutions he couldn't provide, that his pride mattered less than his children's futures. Most painfully, it would mean admitting that the woman he had been falling in love with, because that's what had been happening, he realized. Over all those Tuesday and Friday dinners saw him as someone who needed managing rather than someone who deserved partnership. The absence of Tuesday and Friday dinners created a vacuum in the Bell household that no amount of routine adjustment could fill. Anna noticed immediately, of course, her 8-year-old intuition finely tuned to adult emotional undercurrents that parents often assume children missed entirely. "Is Miss Evelyn sick?" she asked on the first Tuesday evening when only 3 place settings appeared on their kitchen table. "No, sweetheart," Mason replied, focusing on stirring pasta sauce with more attention than the task required. "She's not sick. Did we do something wrong?" Tommy added, arranging his dinosaur figures around his plate in a formation that had become routine during Evelyn's visits. "Did I talk too much about herbivores?" "Anna says I talk too much about herbivores." "Sometimes." The innocent question struck Mason with unexpected force. His children had formed genuine attachments to Evelyn, had incorporated her into their understanding of family structure, had come to expect her presence as part of their weekly rhythm. Her absence wasn't just an inconvenience to explain it. Was a loss they were experiencing in real time. "You didn't do anything wrong," Mason assured them both. "Sometimes adults have disagreements about important things, and they need time to figure out how to solve them." Anna, perceptive as always, recognized that this explanation contained layers of adult complexity that weren't being fully shared. "But she come back, right? After you figure out how to solve the disagreement." Mason hesitated, unwilling to make promises he couldn't keep, but also reluctant to suggest that Evelyn's absence might be permanent. "I don't know yet, Anna. I hope so." The conversation shifted to school topics and homework concerns, but Mason could see that both children remained unsettled by the change. Tommy kept glancing toward the empty chair where Evelyn usually sat, and Anna's questions about her science project lacked their usual enthusiasm. The disruption of routine was affecting them more deeply than he had anticipated. At bedtime, the impact became more pronounced. Anna, usually eager to discuss whatever book she was reading or scientific concept she was exploring, seemed distracted and subdued. "I miss her," she said simply as Mason tucked her into bed. "She explained things in ways that made sense, and she always listened to all of my questions, even the ones you said were getting too complicated for dinner conversation." Tommy, never one to mask his emotions behind diplomatic language, was more direct. "I want Miss Evelyn to come back. She was teaching me about which dinosaurs lived in different places, and we were going to make a map of where all the fossils have been found. Mason felt the weight of his children's disappointment, understanding that his conflict with Evelyn was creating consequences that extended far beyond his own hurt feelings. Anna and Tommy had experienced loss before their mother's death had taught them that people they loved could disappear, and Evelyn's sudden absence was probably triggering fears they couldn't fully articulate. "Would it help if I explained what happened?" Mason asked, sitting on the edge of Anna's bed while Tommy listened from his bunk above. "Yes," Anna replied immediately. "I hate not understanding things." Mason chose his words carefully, trying to provide age-appropriate honesty without burdening them with adult complexities. "Miss Evelyn wanted to help our family with money for things like college and special programs for your education. But instead of talking to me about it first, she created a complicated system to give us money without telling us it was coming from her." "Like a secret?" Tommy asked. "Like a secret," Mason confirmed. "And I felt hurt that she didn't trust me enough to have an honest conversation about it." Anna processed this information with her characteristic thoroughness. "But she was trying to help us." "Yes, she was trying to help." "And you're mad because she didn't ask you first?" "I'm hurt because she didn't ask me first," Mason corrected gently. "There's a difference between being mad and being hurt. When you're mad, you want to punish someone. When you're hurt, you want to understand why something happened and figure out how to fix it." Tommy's voice came from the top bunk, muffled by his pillow but clearly confused. "If she wants to help us, and you want us to have help, why can't you just say thank you and let her come back to dinner?" The question revealed the logical simplicity that adults often complicated through layers of pride, precedent, and emotional complexity. From a 6-year-old's perspective, the solution was obvious. People who cared about each other found ways to compromise and move forward. "Because," Mason said slowly, "when people care about each other, they need to be honest with each other. If Miss Evelyn makes important decisions about our family without talking to me, it means she doesn't see me as an equal partner in those decisions. But couldn't you just tell her that she needs to talk to you next time?" Anna asked. "Couldn't you make a rule about it?" Mason smiled despite his emotional turmoil, recognizing that his daughter had identified the core issue with characteristic clarity. "That's actually a very good idea, Anna. The question is whether Miss Evelyn and I can figure out how to make that kind of rule work." Over the following days, Mason found himself constantly reminded of Evelyn's absence. The science magazine she had been bringing for Anna sat unread on the counter. Tommy's dinosaur books remained at whatever chapter they had reached during her last visit. The kitchen felt too large for 3 people after weeks of accommodating 4. More significantly, Mason realized how much he had come to rely on Evelyn's perspective during their dinner conversations. She had a gift for asking questions that helped Anna articulate her thoughts more clearly, for engaging with Tommy's enthusiasm in ways that validated his interests, while gently expanding his knowledge base. But beyond her interactions with his children, Mason missed Evelyn herself, her curiosity about their daily routines, her willingness to learn domestic skills she had never needed in her corporate environment, her gradual transformation from polished executive to someone who laughed easily and asked silly questions and seemed genuinely happy to spend Friday evenings helping with homework. He had been falling in love with her, Mason acknowledged during the quiet evenings after Anna and Tommy were asleep. Not with the successful CEO or the wealthy benefactor, but with the woman who had learned to braid Anna's hair for school pictures and who had spent an entire Saturday helping Tommy organize his rock collection according to various geological properties. The scholarship letter remained on his kitchen counter, a daily reminder of both Evelyn's generosity and the fundamental disagreement about trust and decision-making that had driven them apart. Mason read through the documentation several times, unable to deny that the educational opportunities it represented could transform his children's futures in ways that his firefighter salary never could. But accepting the scholarship felt like accepting the premise that he was insufficient as a single parent, that love and effort weren't enough to provide Anna and Tommy with the opportunities they deserved. More painfully, it felt like validating Evelyn's decision to act unilaterally rather than engaging him as an equal partner in choices that affected his family. At work, Captain Rodriguez noticed Mason's distraction during routine equipment checks and safety briefings. "Everything okay at home, Belle?" he asked after Mason had to be reminded twice about updating maintenance logs. "Family complications," Mason replied, unwilling to elaborate on the details but recognizing that his preoccupation was affecting his professional performance. "The kids okay?" "The kids are fine. It's more about ... adult relationships and how they intersect with parenting decisions." Captain Rodriguez, father of 3 and veteran of numerous domestic negotiations, nodded knowingly. "Among other things. Those are always the hardest conversations. Everybody wants to help. Nobody wants to feel diminished. And meanwhile the kids are watching everything we do and learning lessons we probably don't mean to teach them." The observation stuck with Mason throughout his shift. Anna and Tommy were indeed watching how he handled this conflict, learning about relationships and compromise and the difference between pride and principles. If he refused the scholarship entirely, he would be teaching them that accepting help was weakness. If he accepted it without addressing the underlying trust issues, he would be teaching them that deception was acceptable when motivated by good intentions. Meanwhile, across town in her temporary corporate apartment, Evelyn was conducting her own difficult examination of the decisions that had led to this separation. She had been staying in a furnished rental while her mansion was rebuilt, a sterile environment that emphasized how much she had come to value the warmth and chaos of Mason's family dinners. Her executive assistant had noticed a change in her schedule: no more early departures on Tuesday and Friday evenings, no more requests to reschedule late afternoon meetings to accommodate family commitments. The return to her previous workaholic patterns felt like regression rather than professional dedication. "Everything all right?" Rebecca, her longtime assistant, asked during their weekly planning session. "You seem to be working longer hours lately, just focusing on the quarterly projections," Evelyn replied, but she knew the answer was incomplete. Work had become a refuge from the emotional complexity she had discovered in Mason's kitchen, a return to the familiar territory where problems had solutions and efforts produced measurable results, but the work felt hollow in ways it hadn't before. Her time with Anna and Tommy, board meetings about market penetration and competitive advantage seemed trivial compared to conversations about dinosaur evolution and climate change concerns. Strategic planning sessions felt empty compared to the collaborative problem-solving that characterized family dinners. Most significantly, Evelyn found herself questioning the fundamental assumptions that had guided her adult life. She had built her identity around self-sufficiency and control, had created wealth and professional success as protection against the vulnerability she had experienced as a 12-year-old orphan, but her time with Mason's family had shown her that vulnerability could coexist with strength, that interdependence could be more powerful than independence, that some forms of wealth couldn't be measured in stock valuations or quarterly reports. She missed Anna's scientific curiosity and Tommy's enthusiastic explanations of dinosaur behavior. She missed the comfortable routine of helping with homework and hearing about school experiences. She missed Mason's quiet competence, his ability to balance work stress with family priorities, his gift for making ordinary evenings feel significant and worthwhile. Most painfully, she missed feeling useful in ways that had nothing to do with her professional achievements. In Mason's kitchen, she had been valuable not because of her strategic thinking or market analysis, but because she could help Anna understand fractions and engage with Tommy's passionate interest in paleontology. The Pacific Educational Foundation scholarship sat in administrative limbo, neither accepted nor rejected. a symbol of the impasse between her desire to help and his need for partnership in decisions affecting his family. Evelyn understood Mason's perspective intellectually. She would have reacted similarly if someone had made major decisions about her life without consulting her. But emotionally, she struggled with the implications of his response. From her perspective, the scholarship represented care, investment in Anna and Tommy's futures. Mason's rejection of it felt like rejection of her love for his family, dismissal of her desire to contribute to their well-being. The conflict highlighted fundamental differences in how they approached relationships and problem-solving. Evelyn was accustomed to identifying needs and implementing solutions efficiently. Mason prioritized process and partnership, preferring collaborative decision-making even when it was slower and more complex than unilateral action. Both approaches had merit, but they were proving difficult to reconcile in practice. Evelyn began to understand that building genuine relationships required different skills than building successful companies. That love couldn't be strategic in the same way that business could be strategic. As the days without Tuesday and Friday, dinners accumulated into weeks. Both Evelyn and Mason found themselves facing the same question. Could two people who had learned different lessons from loss find a way to build something together? Or were their differences too fundamental to bridge? The answer would require both of them to risk the kind of vulnerability that had always felt dangerous, to trust that some things were worth the possibility of heartbreak. The call came at 2:17 p.m. on a Wednesday, piercing through Evelyn's quarterly board meeting like an alarm that couldn't be ignored. She had been presenting NextX expansion plans to venture capitalists when her phone displayed Mason's number, the first time he had called her since their confrontation 3 weeks earlier. "I have to take this," she said, stepping out of the conference room despite the surprised expressions of board members, who had never seen her interrupt a meeting for a personal call. "Evelyn?" Mason's voice carried barely controlled panic. "Tommy's been in an accident at school. They're taking him to Oregon Health and Science University Hospital. I'm following the ambulance, but I thought you should know." The words hit her like physical blows. "What happened? Is he conscious? How serious?" Playground equipment collapsed. He was underneath part of it. The paramedic said possible internal injuries, definitely a broken arm. Mason's voice cracked slightly. "Anna's with me. She's terrified, and I don't know who else to call." Evelyn was already gathering her keys, her professional obligations. "Forgotten entirely, I'm coming." "Which entrance should I meet you at?" "Emergency department, main entrance, Evelyn." "Thank you." The drive across Portland felt endless, every red light an obstacle between her and the family she had lost through her own mistakes. Evelyn's hands gripped the steering wheel as she navigated traffic with single-minded focus, her mind racing through scenarios she couldn't bear to fully consider. She found Mason and Anna in the emergency department waiting area, both looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had ever seen them. Anna was pressed against her father's side, tears streaming down her face, while Mason stared at the doors leading to the treatment area with the helpless expression of someone accustomed to solving problems who suddenly faced a situation beyond his control. "Any updates?" Evelyn asked, sitting beside Anna without hesitation. "They took him for CT scans 20 minutes ago," Mason replied. "The surgeon said. She said we should prepare for the possibility of emergency surgery if there's internal bleeding." Anna looked up at Evelyn with red-rimmed eyes. "I saw it happen. The monkey bars just broke. Tommy was hanging from them, and then everything fell, and he was underneath. And he wasn't moving." Evelyn wrapped her arms around Anna, holding the 8-year-old while she sobbed against her shoulder. Over Anna's head, she met Mason's gaze and saw her own terror reflected there, the fear that they might lose this bright, curious, dinosaur-obsessed little boy who had become such an important part of both their lives. "He's going to be okay," Evelyn said, as much to convince herself as to comfort Anna. Tommy is strong and stubborn, just like his father. It's going to take more than some playground equipment to keep him down. Mason nodded, but she could see him struggling with the same helplessness she felt. This wasn't a fire he could run into, wasn't a problem that could be solved through courage or training or professional expertise. This was the terrible randomness of childhood accident, the kind of crisis that reduced even the most capable adults to anxious waiting and desperate hope. "Mr. Bell?" A surgeon in scrubs approached them, her expression serious but not devastated. "I'm Dr. Sarah Kim." Tommy's scans show a clean break in his left arm and significant bruising, but no internal bleeding or organ damage. He's going to be fine. The relief was so overwhelming that Mason actually swayed slightly in his chair. Anna burst into fresh tears, but these were tears of gratitude rather than fear. "He's asking for you," Dr. Kim continued with a slight smile. "Both of you. He specifically wants to know if Miss Evelyn came too, because he has something important to tell her about dinosaur bones being stronger than playground equipment." In Tommy's hospital room, the 6-year-old looked impossibly small in the adult-sized bed, his left arm encased in a bright blue cast that he was already examining with scientific curiosity. "Dad, Miss Evelyn." His voice was hoarse but enthusiastic. "Did you know that when dinosaurs broke their bones, they could still hunt and everything? The doctor said my arm is going to be even stronger when it heals, just like dinosaur bones. That got broken and grew back together." Evelyn felt something break open in her chest, not the carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart, but something simpler and more fundamental. This was what mattered. Not quarterly projections or board meetings or strategic planning sessions, but being present when the people you loved needed you most. "I'm so sorry," she said to Mason as Anna climbed carefully onto the bed to sit beside her brother. "Not just about today, about everything. About the scholarship, about not trusting you enough to be honest, about trying to fix things without talking to you first." Mason looked at her with exhaustion that went beyond the day's crisis. "I'm sorry too. I've been so focused on protecting my pride that I almost missed what was really important, that you love Anna and Tommy, and they love you, and families are supposed to help each other, even when they make mistakes in how they try to help. Especially then," Mason replied. "That's when families figure out how to do better. Tommy, oblivious to the adult emotional undercurrents, was showing Anna how he could still move his fingers despite the cast. "Miss Evelyn, are you going to come to dinner again? Because I have a whole new theory about which dinosaurs would have been the best at recovering from injuries, and I think you'd like to hear about it." Evelyn looked at Anna's hopeful face, at Tommy's bright enthusiasm despite his ordeal, at Mason's expression of cautious optimism mixed with bone-deep weariness. "If your dad says it's okay," she replied carefully, "I would love to come to dinner again. But first, we need to have some grown-up conversations about how to make sure we all trust each other enough to be honest about important things, like making rules about talking before making big decisions," Anna suggested. "Exactly like that," Mason agreed. As they prepared to take Tommy home with discharge instructions and follow-up appointments, Evelyn realized that this crisis had shown her something crucial. When people you love are in danger, nothing else matters. Not pride, not control, not the careful strategies she had spent years developing to protect herself from vulnerability. "Mason," she said quietly as they walked toward the hospital exit, Tommy's discharge papers in her hand while he chattered about getting his cast signed by all his classmates. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you can say no without any consequences." He waited, and she took a breath before continuing. "Would you be willing to let me be part of your family for real? Not as someone who solves problems or provides resources, but as someone who shows up for dinner and helps with homework and holds Anna when she cries and celebrates Tommy's dinosaur discoveries. What about your company, your board meetings, your billion-dollar empire?" Evelyn smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Those things will always be there. But moments like this, watching Tommy be brave in a hospital bed, seeing Anna's relief when she knew he was okay, having you call me because you knew I'd want to be here, these moments are the only ones that actually matter. Mason stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that a little boy just taught me the difference between being successful and being happy. And if you'll let me, I'd like to choose happiness. 2 years later, Mason Bell stood before a packed auditorium at the Portland Convention Center, holding a charred business card that had survived the fire that changed everything. The card's gold lettering was barely visible against the soot, but the words, "Dream bigger than your circumstances," still caught the light as he addressed an audience of entrepreneurs, investors, and technology leaders. Most people think this story is about a firefighter who got lucky. Mason began, his voice carrying the confidence that came from knowing exactly what he wanted to say. They think it's about a CEO who had money to invest in good ideas. But that's not what happened at all. In the front row, Evelyn sat beside Anna and Tommy, now 10 and 8 respectively. Anna wore a junior scientist badge from the summer program. She attended through the scholarship they had eventually accepted after long conversations about partnership and trust. Tommy's dinosaur-themed tie was slightly crooked, adjusted repeatedly by his own hands as he listened to his father with the pride that children reserved for moments when their parents became larger than life. The real story, Mason continued, is about the moment when someone I cared about looked at me in a hospital waiting room and said something that changed how I understood success entirely. He paused, finding Evelyn's eyes in the audience. She smiled, remembering that conversation outside Tommy's hospital room when she had chosen happiness over achievement, connection over control. She said that moments of showing up for people you love were the only ones that actually mattered. That insight didn't just change my personal life. It revolutionized how I thought about emergency response, about technology, about what problems were worth solving. Mason clicked to the next slide, showing the logo for Bell Family Systems, the company that had grown from a simple idea into a billion-dollar enterprise in 18 months. Traditional emergency response systems are built around efficiency and resource allocation, he explained. But efficiency isn't what people need when they're trapped in burning buildings or waiting in hospital corridors. What they need is connection to know that someone is coming, that they're not forgotten, that their family will be notified and updated and supported throughout the crisis. The technology Mason had developed was deceptively simple. An AI-powered communication system that kept families connected during emergencies, providing real-time updates, emotional support resources, and seamless coordination between first responders and loved ones. But the innovation wasn't in the algorithms, it was in understanding that emergencies were fundamentally human experiences that required human-centered solutions. The day my son was injured at school, Mason continued, I called the person whose opinion mattered most to me, even though we were going through a difficult time in our relationship. That impulse to reach out, to share the burden, to trust that someone who cared about my family would want to know, that became the foundation for everything we built. Evelyn had provided the initial funding and technological expertise, but the vision had been entirely Mason's. He had seen how emergency situations isolated families from each other, how first responders often lacked information that could help them provide better care, how the people who needed support most were often the ones with the least access to it. Bell Family Systems had launched with pilot programs in school districts and fire departments, expanding rapidly as word spread about technology that actually made emergency response more humane. The company now served hospitals, schools, and emergency services across 12 states, with international expansion planned for the following year. The business magazines want to focus on market disruption and scalability, Mason said, advancing to a slide showing their impressive financial projections. But I want to talk about the moment when an 8-year-old girl doesn't have to sit in a hospital waiting room, wondering if anyone remembered to call her grandmother. I want to talk about paramedics who can access a patient's complete support network with a single click, who can notify everyone who needs to know and coordinate care that includes emotional as well as medical needs. As Mason concluded his presentation, explaining how Bell Family Systems measured success, not just in revenue but in families kept connected during their most difficult moments, the audience rose in sustained applause. But his attention was focused entirely on Anna and Tommy, who were clapping with the enthusiasm of children who had watched their father build something meaningful from the ground up. After the presentation, at the reception where investors and journalists competed for Mason's attention, Evelyn found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She still ran Nextech Solutions, but her approach had been transformed by everything she had learned about authentic leadership and genuine collaboration. "Pretty impressive for a guy who just wanted to show up for his kids," she said when Mason finally escaped the crowd of congratulations and business card exchanges. "Pretty impressive for a woman who learned that showing up is the most sophisticated strategy of all," Mason replied, wrapping his arms around her. Anna tugged on Mason's jacket, eager to share her evaluation of the presentation. "Dad, you didn't mention how Miss Evelyn helped you understand that technology should make people feel more connected, not less connected. Or how she taught you that asking for help isn't the same as needing to be rescued," Tommy added, having absorbed more of the adult conversations than they had realized. Mason laughed, recognizing that his children had understood the core of the story better than most of the investors in the room. "You're both absolutely right." As they walked out of the convention center together, Mason carrying Tommy on his shoulders while Anna held Evelyn's hand and chattered about her latest science project, Evelyn felt the profound contentment that came from building something real and lasting with people who mattered. The charred business card remained in Mason's wallet, no longer a reminder of destruction, but a symbol of transformation. "Dream bigger than your circumstances" had become their family motto, a recognition that the most meaningful dreams weren't about what you could acquire or achieve, but about who you chose to become and who you chose to love. Two people who had learned different lessons from loss had discovered that their greatest strength lay not in their individual accomplishments, but in their willingness to build something together, a company, a family, a life that honored both success and connection, achievement and love. The billion-dollar valuation was real, documented in quarterly reports and venture capital assessments. But the true fortune they had built couldn't be measured in stock prices or market capitalization. It lived in Tuesday and Friday dinners that had become traditions, in homework sessions that turned into family discussions, in the knowledge that, when crisis came, none of them would face it alone. Sometimes the most extraordinary fortunes really are born from ashes, forged not in boardrooms or bank vaults, but in the moment when people choose to trust that some things, connection, family, love, are worth any risk. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.